All right, let's go ahead and get started, everybody. Welcome back to the Dharma Doors. I'm MC Owens, and this is the San Francisco Dharma Collective. And tonight we're going to read another sutta. We are continuing our journey through the Middle Length Discourses of the Buddha. We are in the final 50 teachings, the final 50 suttas, and we're going to read sutta number 107 tonight. This is called the Gaṇakamoggallāna Sutta. So the Gaṇaka Moggallāna. So Moggallāna is our kind of our main person. It's the sutra is named after this person, and we've heard this name many times. This is Moggallāna, but this is not the famous Moggallāna. So this is why we call the famous Moggallāna, we call him Maha Moggallāna, the great Moggallāna. And that's because there's actually a lot of people that have this name. In fact, tonight's sutta and then sutta number 108, the following one, is to another person named Moggallāna. This is Moggallāna, the Gaṇaka. And a Gaṇaka is basically a mathematician. You could also translate it as an accountant. The idea being that we're not really doing theoretical math for math's sake. We're doing math for a reason. And so the person is understood to be an accountant. And that's going to be important tonight. So, yeah, let's dive in, kind of find out what the sutta's about, like what's the question, right? So, we have the link online. If you have your copy, this is the Gaṇakamoggallāna Sutta, and it goes a little something like this. Thus have I heard, on one occasion the Blessed One, the Buddha, was living in Savatthi, but now, this time, he's in the Eastern Park, so not at Anathapindika's park, not the Jeddah Grove where he's normally hanging out. Tonight, he's over in the Palace of Migra in the Eastern Park. And this, just really quickly, because we don't discuss this often, there is a woman. She is a lay devotee. Her name is Visakha, and Visakha donated and had built this giant palace. And this is what is known as the Palace of Migara's mother. And what you kind of need to know is that Visakha is the Buddha's number one female lay devotee, and is basically sort of the mirror of Anathapindika. So the person that donated the Jetavana, Anathapindika's park, well, this is the sort of the female version, and not that it's exclusively for the bhikshunis, it's just sort of on the east side of town. So that's where we are tonight. I just wanted to let you all know that little backstory. Then the Brahmin, and it's important that we understand that this is a Brahmin by social class, not necessarily by occupation, because he's an accountant. So he's a Brahmin class, and he's not a Buddhist. He's just a person. Then the Brahmin Gaṇaka Moggallāna, went to the Blessed One and exchanged greetings with him. When this courteous and amiable talk was finished, he sat down at one side and he said to the Blessed One, Master Gotama, in this palace of Migara's mother, there can be seen gradual processes. It says gradual training and gradual practice and gradual progress. But what he's referring to is that the palace is built in levels, and it was built in stages. So he's remarking that the people that built this palace, they did it in a process. So he says, this palace of Migra's mother, there can be seen gradual aspects, gradual things, gradual processes. That is, down to the very last step of the staircase. Among these Brahmins, too, there can be seen gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. That is, gradual processes in study. Among archers, too, there is gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. And also among Gaṇakas, among you accountants or mathematicians likewise, who earn your living by accounting, there can too be seen gradual training, gradual practice, gradual processes. That is, processes in computation. And now he's speaking as an accountant. For when we get an apprentice, first, we make him count 1 1, and then 2 2s, and then 3 3s, and 4 4s, and 5 5s, and 6 6s, and 7 7s, and 8 8s, 9 9s, all the way up to 10 sets of 10. And we make him count 100 too. Now, is it also possible, Master Gautama, to describe a gradual training, a gradual practice, and a gradual progress in this Dharma, in this discipline? And the Buddha says, it is possible, Brahman, to describe a gradual training, a gradual practice, and a gradual progress in this Dharma and discipline. So, even before we get to the Buddha's answer, it's a pretty straightforward question. It's actually a really excellent sutta in that way, because it is a very straightforward question, which is, when somebody's going to start practicing archery, there are processes, there's like steps to learning it. And if you're going to learn mathematics or you're going to build a house, there's like steps and processes. If somebody comes to study under you, Buddha, what are the steps? What are the processes? Very straightforward question. Everybody on board? All right. So the Buddha says, yeah, it's possible to describe a gradual training and a gradual process in this Dharma, in this discipline. He says, just like Brahman, just like when a clever horse trainer obtains a fine thoroughbred colt, he first makes him get used to wearing the bit, and then afterwards trains him further. So when the Tathagata obtains a person to be tamed, he first disciplines him this way, saying, "Come, bhikkhu, be virtuous, be restrained with the restraint of the pratimoksha, be perfect in conduct, and be perfect in your resort, in your refuge, and see a fear the slightest fault. Train by undertaking the training precepts." That's part one. Notice the Buddha didn't say anything about counting breaths. Notice the Buddha didn't say anything about meditation and all of that. He said, oh, if I get a new student, the first thing that we train the new student in is the precepts in morality. You could call it shila. You could call it the patimokkha or the pratimoksha. Those are all the kind of the rules of discipline. Of course, primarily, we always just want to be thinking about the big five: killing, stealing, lying, drunkenness, and abusing sexuality. Those are the big five. If you're not dealing with those, like you're lying and you're violent and you're drunk and all of that, we're not going anywhere. So the first thing the Buddha says is, well, the first thing I do is I train them in the discipline. And by the way, last week's sutta, we got introduced to the patimoksha idea, the kind of the rules. That idea came up last time. So there's a little bit of overlap with last week's sutta. But that's the first step. Observing these precepts. Again, they could be just the 5, or the 8, or the 10, or all 250. So, everybody understand that? Yeah. Notice that the Buddha thou says, when Brahman, when the bhikkhu is virtuous, restrained with the restraint of the pratimoksha, perfect in conduct and resort, and seeing fear in the slightest fault. So when they are at that level and having trained by undertaking training in the precepts, then the Tathagata disciplines the bhikkhu further, saying, come, bhikkhu, guard the sense doors. So guard the doors of your sense faculties. On seeing a form with the eye, do not grasp at its characteristics, meaning do not grasp at its lakshana, do not grasp at its nimitta. So upon seeing a form with the eye, do not grasp at its, what it says as signs, but characteristics and features. Since if you were to leave the eye faculty fully unguarded, evil, unwholesome states of covetousness and grief might invade you. Practice the way of its restraint. Guard the eye faculty. Undertake the restraint of the eye faculty. Now, the same formula is used for hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching, as well as thinking. But really quickly, I want to talk really quickly about this idea of guarding the sense doors. This is not meditation. We're not meditating yet. We notice that our eyes are wide open and we are encountering forms with the eyes. We are encountering sounds with the ears. We are encountering scents. We are encountering flavors. We're encountering feelings. We're encountering ideas, thoughts. But the Buddha says, guard your sense doors. And what does it mean to guard the sense doors? It means to, I always want to get the language just right, to not grasp at whatever the object is, whether it's a sound or what have you, but to not grasp at its characteristics. Now, this is a really big idea. You know, many of you know, many are taking it, but I am teaching my course on the Vajra Sutra, this kind of really important early Mahayana Buddhist sutra. And in that sutra too, the Buddha is saying, don't grasp at characteristics of visible forms and sounds and smells. So I want to kind of remind you that this is just about walking around, eyes open, ears open, encountering things. And then in the context of this sutta, grasping at characteristics is, I mean, it has levels to it. But the most kind of basic level, it's about like, ooh, that's pretty. Ooh, that's attractive. Ooh, that's ugly. Ooh. So it's about the characteristics of things that would get you turned on, that would get you worked up, that would get you excited. That, to use the language of the Buddha, it's characteristics that would invade your mind and then cause covetousness or grief. So covetousness is like, ooh, I need it. I want it. Gotta have it. Grief is the, oh, this is terrible. So we want to kind of notice that it's the characteristics of things that are causing this tumult in that way. And so we are developing a way, you might want to call it an equanimous way, but it's a way of observing phenomena without getting all worked up about it. Of remaining calm, remaining neutral, being able to observe in that way. That's guarding the sense doors. So we're working on our morality first, following precepts, getting all of that kind of gunk cleared out. Next step now is guarding the sense doors. But again, this is just about not getting worked up about things. It's a practice. And again, it goes for all 6 sense faculties and encountering their respective sense objects. Yeah. Everybody okay and comfortable with the idea of guarding the sense doors as a practice? All right. Now, next up, I have something super important to tell you about this next section, but let me read it first. So, step 3, if you're keeping count. When Brahman, when the bhikkhu guards the doors of the senses, then the Tathagata disciplines the bhikkhu even further, saying, come, bhikkhu, be moderate in your eating. Reflecting wisely, you should take food neither for amusement, nor for intoxication, nor for the sake of physical beauty or attractiveness, but only for endurance and the continuance of the body, for ending discomfort, and for assisting in the holy life. Considering, thus I shall terminate old feelings without arousing new feelings, and I shall be healthy and blameless, and I shall live in comfort. All right, so that's step 3, being moderate in one's eating. If you've been coming to Dharma doors for a long time, you've noticed that there's a little thread in the early Buddhist tradition that is around eating. Like it's a big thing in a way. What I want you to know though is that why did I do that? I had reason, I think it's later on. I had a reason to go find a Chinese version of this same sutta. I often mention this in Dharma doors, that all of these Pali suttas, all of these original teachings of the Buddha that are preserved in this Pali language, they're also, all of them are preserved in Chinese as well, in the Chinese Buddhist canon. And if you're kind of a historian, what's important to know is that the versions of all of these suttas that are in the Chinese Buddhist canon, they're much older than the versions that were kind of preserved in Southeast Asia, in like mainly Thailand. So I went and translated the Chinese version of this today because I was curious about a certain word, and then that just led me to just doing the full translation. And I was very surprised. I wasn't surprised actually, But it was very interesting to notice that the Chinese version of the sutra, it doesn't include this about food. It doesn't even talk about it. And it doesn't talk about the next one either. So the next one is basically going to be about sleep deprivation. They're going to call it wakefulness, but it's actually about, in a way, not sleeping. And that too is absent from the Chinese version. But I'll tell you why it's probably absent from the Chinese version. So, as you know, or as you might know, Buddhism starts, in that kind of northeastern Bihar region of India, right? Kind of at the foothills of the Himalayas. And then from there, it spreads north and south. And it splits off into a bunch of different types of Buddhisms. But in general, one type of Buddhism sort of migrates south, and that's the Pali version, that's the Theravada, that's that more conservative monastic form of Buddhism that goes south. Whereas the northern types of Buddhism are the types that sort of are eventually become the more Mahayana style forms of Buddhism. And that's what migrates through Central Asia to China. And in the northern Buddhist tradition that migrates over to China, they have something that they call the Dhutta practices. And what it is that in the northern form of Buddhism, and not Mahayana, remember I said that it kind of turns into Mahayana, but before that, the northern schools of classic monastic Buddhism, they took certain things like fasting, or at least the restrictions around food, and the restrictions around sleeping, and a few other things. They grouped all of those together into what they call the Dhutta practices, or the ascetic practices. And what in that tradition, they acknowledge that the Buddha taught certain like moderations around food and taught certain forms of sleep deprivation, but they consider it an extreme practice that you kind of need to get permission to do in that way. In other words, the mainstream normal practice didn't have such harsh restrictions. Whereas these harsh restrictions are they're the foundation of Theravada Buddhism, or at least the early form of Theravada. So I just want you to know that, there's two different ways to read this sutta. There's two different ways to understand Buddhism. And this sutta really, really does represent that more kind of hardcore southern form of monastic Buddhism. Okay, so that being said, any questions about the moderation and eating? I mean, it's a good idea anyways, of course, but all right. So after the person has gotten their morality under control, and now they're not running around getting all excited about everything they see and hear, so their sense doors are guarded. And now that they're being moderate in their consumption, moderate in their eating, the Buddha says, when Brahman, when the bhikkhu is moderate in eating, then the Tathagata disciplines the bhikkhu even further, saying, come, bhikkhu, be devoted to wakefulness. During the day, while walking back and forth and sitting, purify your mind of obstructive states. In the first watch of the night, while walking back and forth and sitting, purify your mind of obstructive states. And then only in the very middle of in the middle watch of the night, basically right around midnight, you should lie down on your right side In the lion's pose, you've seen the Buddha, the sleeping Buddha. That's the lion's pose. So on your right side, kind of like that, laid out flat. So the Buddha says in the middle watch of the night, you should lie down on your right side in the lion's pose with one foot overlapping the other, mindful and fully aware. And this is interesting. There's a lot of literature about this one. After noting in your mind the time for rising, so you do all of that, you set a mental clock, and you go to sleep, or a kind of a moderate sleep. And then after rising in the third watch of the night, so it was only in that brief 2-hour period that you kind of slept. And then after rising in the third watch of the night, while walking back and forth and sitting, purify your mind of obstructive states. So if you've done long meditation retreats, and so you've done long periods of meditation, you may have experienced that your waking and dreaming states start to kind of even out a little bit. And so this is not actually that strange of an idea, that you would only sort of do a formal sleep for a few hours, and then it's because you're not expending a lot of energy in that way. So any questions about wakefulness, as the Buddha calls it? All right. So those are the first 4 steps according to this sutta. And then, Brahman, when the bhikkhu is devoted to wakefulness, then the Tathagata disciplines the bhikkhu even further, saying, "Come, bhikkhu, be possessed of mindfulness and full awareness. Act in full awareness when moving forward and when returning back. Act in full awareness when looking ahead, when looking away. Act in full awareness when flexing and extending your limbs. Act in full awareness when wearing your robes and carrying your outer robe in your bowl. Act in full awareness when eating and drinking, consuming food and tasting. Act in full awareness when defecating and urinating. Act in full awareness when walking, standing, sitting, falling asleep, waking up, talking, and when keeping silent." So that's the 5th step, sati. So sati is the key word there. Sati is mindfulness. Now this is where we get to talk about the way that the English language, we lack words. And what I mean is that we have this one word, meditation. And meditation, it could be guarding the sense doors, frankly. So even going back to step 2, so we would call guarding the sense doors a type of meditation, and we would call mindfulness or sati a type of meditation. But the problem is, if we call step 5, if this sati, mindfulness step, if we call this meditation, what are we going to call the next step? In other words, rather than relying on this English word idea of meditation, I think we should get comfortable with the idea of guarding the sense doors as one activity. And it is, again, kind of my understanding of it is how I described it, sort of not getting worked up by everything or getting depressed by everything. That's an important part of that. Avoiding covetousness and grief, right? So that's first thing. Now the Buddha's talking about sati, or mindfulness. And mindfulness is actually kind of easy to define in a way, because it's the opposite of mindlessness. And mindlessness is actually when you like do something with your body, say something with your voice, or even in a way think something with your mind. But let's go to the body. It's when you are actually doing something with your body and it's like, oh, whoops, sorry. Sorry, I wasn't aware of my own being. I wasn't aware of what my body was actually doing. Sorry, I totally ran into you. So that would be mindless, is actually not being aware of yourself. Whereas being fully aware, this idea of acting in full awareness, when you're walking back, defecating, urinating, anything, you are doing it with full attention and awareness. And that is sati. You could call that meditation, and a lot of people do call that meditation. But again, if we call that meditation, what are we going to call the next thing? So, sati is about this attentiveness, an awareness. And again, this is cultivated. It's cultivated by doing it in that sense of being aware in that way. But that's the step 5. Mhm. Everybody good with step 5? And then step 6. This is what I was referring to. If we called any of that meditation, what's this? But remember, there are steps to this, that you wouldn't even really do this if you hadn't cultivated morality, guarding of the sense doors, and so on. But if you've got all of that under control, or when the bhikkhu possesses mindfulness and full awareness, then the Tathagata disciplines them even further, saying, "Come, bhikkhu, resort to a secluded resting place, a forest, the root of a tree, a mountain, a ravine, a hillside cave, a charnel ground, a jungle thicket, an open space, a heap of straw, somewhere secluded." The practitioner, the bhikkhu, resorts to a secluded resting place, a forest, a cave, so on and so forth, a heap of straw. And then, upon returning from an alms round, after taking a meal, one sits down, folding the legs crosswise, setting the body erect, and establishing mindfulness right in front of them. Abandoning desire, abandoning covetousness for the world. One abides with a mind free from covetousness. One purifies the mind of covetousness. Abandoning ill will and hatred. One abides with a mind free from ill will and hatred, compassionate for the welfare of all living beings. One purifies the mind of ill will and hatred. Abandoning sloth and torpor. One abides free from sloth and torpor, percipient of light, mindful and fully aware. One purifies the mind of sloth and torpor. Abandoning restlessness or anxiety and remorse. One abides unagitated with a mind inwardly peaceful. One purifies the mind of restless anxiety and remorse. And number 5, abandoning doubt. One abides having gone beyond doubt, unperplexed about wholesome states. One purifies the mind of doubt. Having thus abandoned these 5 hindrances, those imperfections of the mind that weaken wisdom, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, one enters upon and abides in the first jhana, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought, with rapture and a pleasure born of seclusion. Then, with the stilling of that applied and sustained thought, one enters upon and abides in the second jhana, which has self-confidence and singleness of mind without applied and sustained thought, with rapture and pleasure born of concentration. Then, with the fading away as well of rapture, one abides in equanimity and mindful and fully aware, still feeling pleasure with the body. One enters upon and abides in the third jhana, on account of which the noble ones announce, one has a pleasant abiding, the one who has equanimity and who is mindful. And then, with the abandoning of both pleasure and pain, and with the previous disappearance of joy and grief, one enters upon and abides in the fourth jhana, which has neither pain nor pleasure, and a purity of mindfulness due to equanimity. This is my instruction, Brahman, to those bhikkhus who are in the higher training, whose minds have not yet attained the goal, who abide aspiring to the supreme security from bondage. All right, let's pause there. We have more to go. So, once you've got the precepts, all of the morality under control, and then you're good at guarding the sense doors, and, moderate eating, moderate sleeping, that's helpful. Then you're cultivating sati. And if you're good at cultivating this full awareness, if you've got your wits about you, then the Buddha tells you to go on retreat. And then go and enjoy the bliss of seclusion, the bliss of concentration, the peacefulness of equanimity, and then that liberation of the fourth jhana. So that's the graduated process. Those are the steps that the Buddha would lead a bhikkhu through. Any questions, in particular, any questions about the super important teaching of the 5 nivaranya, the 5 hindrances? It's such an important teaching, right? This idea of yeah, Noe, you got something?
Wow, this is how apropos. I've been going about it all wrong.
Better late than never.
Better late than never. It truly is. And of course, it isn't new, but tonight is especially wonderful in the tradition of Zodo Zen and Zazen. Zazen is not meditation. It is a preparation for awareness. And it just makes a lot more sense to me hearing these words from the Buddha of all these steps. Thank you so much. I'm glad I'm reading
Oh,
these with you. Thank you so
excellent.
much. And that idea of, it isn't, it's about awake, being aware, being awake,
Hmm.
guard against all these things, then to enter it. Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you.
Excellent, Noe. And I think what we want to notice in Noe's recognition that this is about being awake, we want to recognize what's keeping us asleep in that way. And so we go all the way back to the Buddha's first, the first step, which is, well, if you're running around lying for some ridiculous reason, if you think you're gaining something by lying, well, you should deal with all of that because that way of thinking is keeping you in the slumber. Violence is another one. I've been on a big kick about not violence, but in anti-violence in that way, and really kind of trying to get across how in a way how easy violence is, but how difficult peace is. And this idea this idea of mistaking violence for strength. No, it's weakness. It's absolute weakness because it's so base and instinctual and it doesn't require any effort to be violent in that way. It's so instinctual. Whereas to actually practice restraint, to actually be peaceful, that's strong. That's actually superhuman in many ways. So, but if you're in some delusional state where you think violence is winning, that's keeping you in the slumber. So all of these kind of the precepts are helping you clear out the gunk that are kind of keeping you in the delusion in that way. And then, of course, if we're walking around getting all excited or worked up or sad about everything we see or hear, that's also going to be keeping us in the slumber. So we kind of have to work on all of these preliminary things. And then we are prepared in that way to now go again to reap the real fruit in that way. So, all right, there's plenty more to go. Thank you, Noe. There's plenty more to go, but there's the reason why I wanted to jump back to the five hindrances real quick. So, in the context of this sutta, even in the context of the way that I've taught it, abandoning covetousness. So, the first hindrance is this gotta have it, right? That mentality. Obviously, that's going to keep you trapped and stuck. And so, this idea of going on retreat and enjoying not needing anything, enjoying not consuming in that way. So that's the idea of abandoning covetousness. Okay. And then there's abandoning ill will and hatred. Number two, the second hindrance makes total sense. Next up, sloth and torpor, laziness, the opposite of effort, the opposite of virya. So that's holding you back. That's keeping you down in that way. Then there's restlessness and worry, which again, you can kind of just summarize as anxiety. So all of those are kind of, anyways, all too familiar. We know about those. But I want to talk just for a quick moment about the fifth hindrance of doubt, because ultimately this sutta is kind of about that, surprisingly. So the Buddha says you go on retreat, you practice your kind of quote meditation, you abandon these hindrances, including abandoning doubt. One abides having gone beyond doubt, unperplexed about wholesome states. That's what I want to talk about. That idea of being unperplexed about wholesome states. So let's just say you heard what I said about violence, or you heard what I said about lying, or you heard what I said about any of the morality stuff. If you're sitting there going like, there might be, there might be violence might be okay sometime, right? Lying might be called for some reason, right? In other words, if you're looking for some excuse to keep lying and to keep being violent, you are perplexed about wholesome states. To be unperplexed about wholesome states is to understand clearly why these things like not killing, stealing, and lying are actually in your best interest. You are suffering because of them. And to be unperplexed about wholesome states is to understand, oh, yeah, I want to be honest. I want to be peaceful. That's what I like. But again, you might be perplexed and thinking, well, I don't know. Otherwise, why are you still doing those things? Right? I was perplexed about a lot of this for a long time, and I still am. But there are certain things where I am not perplexed about anymore, where I've realized, oh, yeah, the Buddha was right about that fully. So that was just a preliminary remark on doubt, by the way. The idea of not being perplexed by wholesome states. But we have more to say about that. But any questions or comments or ideas about the 5 nivarana, the 5 hindrances? Okay. So the Buddha walks our Moggallāna through I guess you could count it as 6 steps, the 6th step being going on retreat, entering the jhanas. Then the Buddha says this thing about, this is how I teach it, right? This is my instruction, Brahman, to the bhikkhus who are in the higher training. So if you have done the first steps, then you can go on retreat. And then he says, but, and I'm reading where I left off, but these things, meaning everything we just talked about, all the way up to the 4th jhana, he says, but these things conduce both to a pleasant abiding here and now and to mindfulness and full awareness for those bhikkhus who are arhats with taints destroyed, who have lived the holy life, who've done what had to be done, who have laid down the burden, reached their goal, destroyed the fetters of being, and who are completely liberated through final knowledge. In other words, even for the arhats, the most enlightened, they still do all of the things that I just said, that is the Buddha, because it's conducive to a pleasant abiding. It's pleasant. This is often my kind of one of my phrases about Buddhas not meditating to become enlightened, but they meditate because they are enlightened. So arahats continue to meditate, but not because they need to get anywhere, because they're enlightened in that way. So just a beautiful little thing there. When this was said, the Brahmin Gaṇakamoggallāna asked the Blessed One a second question. So this is question number 2, saying, Master Gautama's disciples are thus advised and instructed by him. Do they all attain nirvana, the ultimate goal, or do some not attain it? So this is very much related to last week's sutta. This was a question that was raised about, like, why do some people achieve nirvana but some don't? Like, that was the question of last week's sutta, so it's kind of being asked again here. So Moggallāna asks, yeah, so when people are trained by you, do they all attain nirvana, or do only some attain it? And the Buddha says, when, Brahman, when they are thus advised and thus instructed by me, some of my disciples attain nirvana, the ultimate goal, and some do not attain it. Master Gotama, since nirvana exists, and the path leading to nirvana exists, and Master Gotama is present as the guide, what is the cause and the reason why, when Master Gotama's disciples are thus advised and instructed by him, only some of them attain nirvana, the ultimate goal, and some do not attain it? As to that, Brahman, I will ask you a question in return. Answer it as you choose. What do you think, Brahman? Are you familiar with the road leading to Rajagaha, the capital? Yes, Master Gotama. I am familiar with the road leading to Rajagaha. And what do you think, Brahman? Suppose a man came up to you who wanted to go to Rajagaha, and he approached you and he said, "Venerable sir, I want to go to Rajagaha. Show me the road to Rajagaha." And then you told him, "Now, good man, this road goes to Rajagaha. Follow it for a little while, and then you'll see a certain little village. Go a little further, and then you'll see a certain little town. Go a little further, and you'll see Rajagaha with its lovely parks, its groves, and its meadows, and its ponds. Then, having been thus advised, and thus instructed by you, Moggallāna, let's say that man would take a wrong road, and he would go to the west. But then, a second man came up to you who also wanted to go to Rajagaha, and he approached you, and he said, "Venerable sir, I want to go to Rajagaha. Show me the way to Rajagaha." And then you told him, "Now, good man, this road goes to Rajagaha. Follow it for a little while to a certain village, and then keep going to a little town, and then eventually you'll see Rajagaha with its lovely parks, its groves, its meadows, and its ponds." Then, having been thus advised and instructed by you, that man would arrive safely in Rajagaha. Now, Brahman, since Rajagaha exists, and the path leading to Rajagaha exists, and you are present as the guide, what's the cause and the reason why, when those two men have been thus advised and instructed by you, one man takes the wrong road and goes west, whereas the other one arrives safely in Rajagaha? And Moggallāna responds, "What can I do about that, Master Gotama? I'm the one who shows the way." So too, Brahman, nirvana exists, and the path leading to nirvana exists, and I'm present as the guide. Yet when my disciples have been thus advised and instructed by me, some of them attain nirvana, the ultimate goal, and some do not attain it. What can I do about that, Brahman? The Tathagata is the one that shows the way. When this was said, the Brahman Gaṇakamoggallāna said to the Blessed One, "You know, Buddha, there's people who are faithless, who have gone forth from the home life into homelessness, who become like yogis. Not out of faith, though, but seeking a livelihood, who are fraudulent, deceitful, treacherous, haughty, hollow, personally vain, rough-tongued, loose-spoken, unguarded in their sense faculties, immoderate in their eating, undevoted to wakefulness, unconcerned with recluseship, not greatly respectful of training, luxurious, careless people, leaders in backsliding, neglectful of seclusion, lazy, wanting in energy, unmindful, not fully aware, unconcentrated, with straying minds, devoid of wisdom, dribblers. Master Gotama, you don't dwell together with those kinds of people. But there are clansmen who have gone forth out of faith, who have gone forth out of faith from the home life into homelessness, who are not fraudulent, who are not deceitful or treacherous or haughty or hollow or personally vain or rough-tongued or loose-spoken, who are guarded in their sense faculties, who are moderate in eating, who are devoted to wakefulness, who are concerned with recluseship, who greatly respect the training, who are not luxurious or careless, who are keen to avoid backsliding, leaders in seclusion, energetic, resolute, established in mindfulness, fully aware, concentrated, with unified minds, possessing wisdom, not dribblers. Master Gotama dwells together with these kinds of people. Just as a black orris root is reckoned as the best of root perfumes, and just as red sandalwood is reckoned as the best of incense perfumes, and jasmine is reckoned as the best of flower perfumes, so too, Master Gotama's advice is supreme among the teachings of today. Magnificent, Master Gotama, magnificent. Master Gotama has made the Dharma clear in many ways, as though he were turning upright what had been overturned, revealing what had been hidden, showing the way to one who was lost, or holding up a lamp in the dark for those with eyes to see. I go to Master Gotama for refuge, and to the Dharma, and to the Sangha of bhikkhus. Let Master Gotama remember me as a lay follower who has gone to him for refuge for life. Yay. All right. Questions, comments, answers, ideas. We've got this amazing paragraph, this amazing description of the dribblers, and an amazing description of the non-dribblers. This is sort of what I mean, or what I was talking about being perplexed or not. It's about, if you're not perplexed about which of these is the preferable place to be in that way, if you're still perplexed, then we have training to do. But questions, comments, ideas about any of this? It's a pretty, it's kind of one of the, I really like this sutta, by the way. It's one of those like, this is it. Maria, you got something?
Yeah, it's just that it's just so helpful. Definitely find myself perplexed, definitely have moments of doubt, and it's just so timely. I was having what it is I will be cruising along, and then something happens, and this old sort of response pattern comes in, and I have to remind myself, you know, there's a path, there's a way to respond to this that is more skillful than the old way. And so yeah, just it's a constant practice for me to remember that. And doubt is one of my more difficult knots that I contend with. So
on the note of doubt, Maria, I did want to also mention, so this idea of being perplexed or not, certainly part of what doubt means, because so much of the doubt is, I wouldn't say that it's not as extreme as hedonism, but part of the doubt is about like pleasing oneself. And this idea of and it's kind of what I meant by, obviously we have doubt if we're still doing it in that way, in those ways. So I just kind of want to point out that idea of being perplexed or not was very much what the sutta is about. But there's another aspect of the doubt. It's that beautiful analogy that the Buddha gives with the person trying to get to Rajgaha, and that nirvana exists, and the road to nirvana exists. To not believe that is doubt. To think, well, maybe nirvana exists, but maybe it doesn't. Or a classic one these days would be like, maybe the Buddha achieved such a state, but nobody could possibly achieve such a state. Like, that's basically saying nirvana doesn't exist. And the sutta, that example of, no, it exists. And the way and the road that leads there exists. And that's an aspect of the doubt or not, is even thinking that this road is leading somewhere in that way. So, Noe, do you have a comment?
Thank you for that. Yes. First comment was the familiarity of a lot of the topics in the Gospels in
Hmm.
Christianity, the light into so this is old traditions throughout all of different spiritual practices and religions of the world. Don't hide your light, be a light into the darkness. That came up for me. And the other one was, oh goodness, two things. The one in one of the sutras where what is it? There's the village, and they have to go follow each other across this giant chasm on one side and the chasm on the other, which are the doubts and the fears, and these people are chasing them in order to get to the. This is referring to that but this is much clearer.
Mm-hmm.
Much clearer. I'm
I
so
agree.
glad I got to this. And the last thing I want to say is to everyone here, my own experience of having doubt and asking my teacher, and the response was, perhaps you can doubt less. Thank you, Michael. Doubt less. Thank you.
Yeah, Robin.
It makes me think of to where, like, if you think that you could act, that you think you actually can, for instance, lie and get away with it, or cheat, or even kill and get away with it. So you're doubting spiritual truths. And so it's not so much an admonition like, don't do this. It's like, you can't do this.
Excellent, Robin. That is very much Robin's comment is very dear to my heart because it's how I like to teach Buddhism. I don't like to teach Buddhism as a thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. I like to teach Buddhism as a path of wisdom, where one realizes it's just stupid and silly, foolish to be doing those things, and you just don't want to be foolish. And therefore, it's not the rod, it's not the threat of the rod behind you. It's the joy of being wise in that way. So totally. Yeah, no.
I'm thinking about the list in relation to two things. One is the Eightfold Path and the order in which it's laid out, which meditation is at the end, but it doesn't start with Shila. It starts with like knowledge, right? Wisdom, but then also in terms of practicality, in my experience so far, like I didn't become 100% moral or know how to guard all my sense doors or never overeat or never oversleep or all those things before I ever started meditating. And I really appreciate your commentary on the sutra as you were teaching it as to like what is meditation, you know. So that kind of answers that, but still in my experience it's like, you know, you meditate and you're like, oh, what's that? And then you like notice all these things you're doing, and then you start having a little bit more what's the word, pliability, like ability to address them, and because you're meditating, etc., you kind of go back and forth. So just those are my two comments about the order of them, you know.
Yeah, and I meant to say this at the beginning, or I meant to remind us. I haven't actually made this reminder in a while. It's the reminder that, you know, that when we read a sutta like this is the teaching that the Buddha gave to the mathematician Moggallāna. And I think it's important to read it as this is the teaching that the Buddha gave to that guy, and not the, oh, this is the one size fits all teaching for all people. No, 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 no. It's really helpful to read this and understand, oh, this is the teaching he gave to that guy. And oh, what can I learn from that? And he gave it to Moggallāna in this particular way for a reason. So totally no, like,
It's an
I think
upaya.
it total upaya always is in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. A bunch of few things that came up. Everybody had such great comments and questions. A couple of back. So Robin, I wanted to also mention in an answer or just a comment to your comment. It's also about this idea of like, let's take lying, for example. It's not about the idea of getting away with it so much as it's the idea of like the delusion that it's advantageous, meaning like that I'll be able to get what it's the idea that it's advantageous to do it. It's delusional. One has to look deeper at like, why would I even be lying to try to acquire something? Like, what am I doing here? So it's also this deeper question of like, what's the advantage of doing this? And realizing there's no advantage to being violent or lying in that way. But when we don't know that, we think there is an advantage. Like, oh, but if I lie, it'll be quicker or easier or I don't know what. So I wanted to mention that. I also wanted to mention in regard to Noe's comments, the comment around doubting less. I often like to remind everybody that doubt is so funny because if you actually look at it, doubt is a strange form of certainty. Because if you doubt there's nirvana, you're pretty certain about that. Like, that sounds pretty locked into a belief structure. So how about just be open to the possibility that nirvana exists? Don't be so doubtfully certain that it doesn't in that way. So that's another way of saying doubt less, Noe. And then Noe also commented on like some possible similarities, especially to like early Christianity or like the gospel, early Christianity. And I do want to mention that, you know, early Christianity, not the church, not Catholicism, not post-Nicaea, but the early form of Christianity was very close to Buddhism in terms of it was very close to early Buddhism with its a really negative attitude towards the physical world, the created world in that sense, and a really strong emphasis on what becomes known as a gnosis, knowledge or knowing, that is what is to be acquired is knowledge, spiritual knowledge. But early Christianity was like, don't mess with the world. Like, don't get married, don't have kids, you just don't mess with the world. So in that regard, it was very Gnostic in an early Buddhist way. And then it becomes a church and loves the world again, and things have changed. But I just wanted to comment on Noe's recognition that there are parallels in spiritual traditions. So, oh, and I had one last thing too, for Maria. Maria commented on some samskara, some habitual tendencies. And my suggestion regarding that, or the suggested practice of like everything, is to observe the habitual, like, oh, look at that habitual conditioned reaction. Don't try not to do it in that way, like follow through, but the practice is to actually observe, like, oh, wow, that's a habit. And because that is the way to break that habit, is to kind of call it out and be like, yo, you're a habit in that way. So just a little suggestion on how to deal with the arising of samskara. Yeah, Maria.
Oh, yeah. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I just wanted to add that I so appreciate the discussion. Takes so much encouragement from the gradual path around this, and that works really well for me, and it allows me to see, and first of all, see it in the first place, and then when I make these adjustments, I can see the freedom. I can feel the freedom, and I can, it encourages me. It gives me so much, um,
Yeah.
Virya.
Yay.
Yeah. So it's very helpful, and I'm constantly working toward breaking this really deep cannabis habit that I have from I thought about it the other day, and it's been since I was like 12. So like almost my whole life. And so that's been a very but now I'm starting to see this like desire to have that monkey off my back. And that feels really good. That's new. So, yay.
Awesome. You're not perplexed. Awesome. Awesome. So great to hear. All right, everybody. If you're like me, it's 9:15. So daylight savings is catching up. So let's call it a early Dharma Doors tonight.